the shock to our economy after leaving Europe would tip the country into recession. This could be, for the first time in history, a recession brought on ourselves.
That was Prime Minister David Cameron on Monday making the case for Britain to remain in the European Union. The British will vote next month on whether to exit or remain in the EU, or Brexit, as it has become known. Joining us from London to argue why the UK should stay is journalist, author, and editor-in-chief of InFacts, HUGO DIXON. And joining me on set here in Washington, D.C. is NILE GARDINER. He is the director of the Heritage Foundation's Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom. Thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
Hugo, you're welcome. I want to talk for a moment. The Institute for Financial Studies released a report yesterday, and they claim we're looking at 2 years of public spending cuts and more taxes should people, or the UK, leave the European Union. Is that valid in your estimation? You've been covering financial affairs for a long time, Hugo.
Yes, I think that is valid. I think that when Cameron said that Brexit would lead to a recession, I myself would say could lead to a recession. I think it's quite likely but not certain. And the reason is, though, because of the huge uncertainty that would be unleashed by such a vote. We have, and what the uncertainty would be about our future trading arrangements with the rest of the EU, which is the largest trading bloc in the world and responsible for nearly half our trade. And it's very unlikely we would get anything like as good access to that market as we currently have. And it would take many years to sort out exactly what the arrangement was going to be. And so in this period of uncertainty, companies would pull back on their investment and consumers might also hold back on their spending. And there also may be political turmoil. I think you have to realize that David Cameron himself in that situation is unlikely to stay Prime Minister. So in all of the mix, you could easily have a recession. And that would then mean that the government would have less money to spend, not more. And so you would have probably some more rounds of austerity, or you just have to see the budget deficit ballooning.
Okay, let me bring NILE GARDINER in. Your reaction to what Hugo is saying and the argument he's making.
Well, I very much disagree with what Hugo said and also what the Prime Minister has said. And I think that the whole premise of the Remain campaign is based upon fear-mongering, scaremongering, trying to frighten the British people. And let's not forget that Great Britain is the world's 5th biggest economy. And I think that there's every opportunity here for a resurgent Britain on the world stage, a self-confident Britain. I'm in no doubt that a very good deal will be struck with the European Union, that Great Britain will also be signing a series of free trade agreements with countries across the world, including the United States as well, no matter what Barack Obama has to say about this. And Great Britain's economy at the moment is doing well. I would expect that Britain's economy will do even better if Britain leaves the European Union.
Now some are saying that on your side of the debate, the Brexit side, that this could save Great Britain $350 million a week, because that is 350 million pounds rather a week, because that is the commission paid to the EU right now. Is that a valid argument?
Yes,
Does that offset any economic dislocation that might result from this?
That's a very good point. I do think that the European Union is a drain on the British exchequer, and I believe, frankly, that British people will be far better off outside of the European Union. The EU is in decline, and there's economic decay across large parts of the Eurozone. Great Britain unshackled from the European Union as a great free trading nation on the international stage will be a far more powerful player internationally. And also I do believe that British people will be definitely better off as well.
Do you want to react, Hugo? Go ahead.
No, I just think that this £350 million figure is untrue, and I hope Niall doesn't believe it's true. We do not send £350 million a week to Brussels. This is something that the people who want to take us out of the EU are saying, and frankly, they know it's untrue. It's a deliberate campaign of misinformation.
That's simply not true, Hugo, actually, and that's your opinion. But I think a
Well,
large
the
number of
Office
British
of
people would
National
disagree with
Statistics,
that.
which is in charge, the office, well, they might disagree, but that's only because of the propaganda that's been put forward. The Office of National Statistics has said it's a misleading figure. The Institute of Fiscal Studies...
It's their own figures, Hugo.
...said that it was absurd. And Maggie Thatcher, who you are the lead, her think tank or her institute there in Washington, she negotiated a discount on our subscription to the EU. And it's precisely because of that that we do not send £350 million
let me just respond to that.
And frankly, I'm rather surprised, Niall, that you do not know that fact.
OK, Niall, go ahead. Respond quickly. I need to move on.
Hugo, let me point this out. I worked for Margaret Thatcher. I knew Margaret Thatcher very well. And it was her view, certainly, that Britain should leave the European Union. If Margaret Thatcher were alive today, I'm in no doubt that she would be supporting a British exit.
£350 million
and
a week to Brussels.
You're basically...
We're not talking about what she may or may not have thought.
You're recycling, frankly,
this misinformation that your side is putting out day after day.
OK, Hugo, give him a moment to respond.
Propaganda there.
Go ahead.
Hugo, I mean, you're recycling the classic scaremongering words of the Remain campaign.
No, I'm not. I'm just trying to get
very,
you to
very
admit
desperate
what the
at the
facts
moment,
are.
really. And that £350 million figure is actually an official government figure.
And I'm astonished that you're actually still retailing that figure. It is false.
I would urge you to actually read the government's own statistics on this.
OK, I'm going to stop this for a moment.
Read them.
But
I
love the back and forth,
wrong.
but I need to get to this. Another argument made by the Leave camp is that sovereignty is what is driving this debate and the effort to leave the EU. This is UKIP leader Nigel Farage making his argument.
What we want are just ordinary people and businesses and folk out there to say this system isn't working for them. They want their borders back, they want their passports back, they want their country back.
Doesn't the immigration, Hugo, the unfettered immigration, and we just have a new government report from the Office of National Statistics saying that migration nearly broke the record in the past year, 333,000 people in the year to December 2015. The record of 336,000 was set in June of last year. Doesn't this unfettered migration being controlled out of Brussels, doesn't that put pressure on public services, hospitals, schools, etc.? Is that part of what's driving the desire to break away from the EU?
It clearly is the main factor that is driving the Leave camp and their supporters. But there is a lot of misinformation about this. The evidence shows that EU migrants, they are younger, they are better educated, and they have a higher employment rate than the native population. As a result, they are contributors to our economy, not takers from our economy. They contribute more in taxes than they consume in public services such as health and schools, partly because they're young and they don't actually use our health service very much. And so there is a lot of misinformation about this, but clearly it is correct that this is one of the driving factors behind many people's view that we should leave the EU.
Niall, your thoughts on what do you make of the argument that the immigration is putting such pressure that it's driving down the wages of working class Britishers?
Well, certainly mass immigration is placing tremendous pressure on public services in the United Kingdom. I think that's an undeniable fact. I think the most important issue here is whether or not Britain should be able to decide who comes into the country. At the moment, the British government does not have full control over the immigration system. And under current EU laws, if you're an EU citizen, you're able to move into the United Kingdom, to reside there, to live there, and to benefit from British services. And so I think that this is a fundamental issue of sovereignty and self-determination. And the British people alone should decide who comes into their country and not Brussels.
Another consideration is what other countries and other EU members think about Brexit in terms of future trade agreements. President Obama, during a recent visit to England, made it very clear where he stands.
I think it's fair to say that maybe some point down the line there might be a UK-US trade agreement, but it's not going to happen anytime soon because our focus is in negotiating with a big bloc, the European Union, to get a trade agreement done. And UK is going to be in the back of the queue.
Hugo, respond to this, and I know you had an earlier point you wanted to respond to.
Well, I just wanted to say on the free movement of people, it's important to understand it goes both ways. British people are free to go and live and work and retire in 27 other European Union countries. So that is a big bonus that we get from free movement, quite apart from the wealth that the EU citizens create for Britain when they come and work.
Yeah, but those economies, some of those economies are very fragile.
Some of them are, but some of them are actually doing quite well. And in fact, when you look at what happens, the British people who move across the Channel, the English Channel, to other countries, often they are retirees, are senior citizens who are going to places like Spain and the south of France, which are warmer than England. I mean, you know, we have fantastic weather, but not everybody loves it. And it's quite nice to be able to retire in the Mediterranean. Now, if we leave the EU, we would lose that automatic right, because if we're going to say to the European citizens, you can't come here automatically, they're sure as hell going to say to us, you can't come to us either automatically.
Niall, very quickly.
Well, I would say, you know, Britain at the moment is a far more attractive destination for most Europeans than the other way around, actually. I think the British economy is by far the strongest major economy in Europe. And we are seeing record levels of mass immigration into the United Kingdom. The British people should decide whether or not they want to have that. But also on the point with regard to President Obama's intervention earlier, which I thought was absolutely outrageous. The US president coming over to Britain, telling the British people how to vote in their own referendum, that was an insult to the British people and a slap in the face for the British people. I think polling certainly showed that a large number of British people were very, very, I think, upset with the president's intervention, and rightly so. The British people alone must decide their own future. Okay. It's not the place of President Obama to tell them how to vote.
I want to give Hugo a chance. Hugo, some would say, look, the President Obama says he's loath at the moment to do a pact with the UK directly. But does it make sense trying to get 28 countries to agree to a trade agreement when you could get one to agree to it?
Well, look, first of all, President Obama did not tell the British people how to vote. What he did say is that he said, no, he didn't. What he did say is that if Britain left the EU, cutting a trade deal between America and Britain wouldn't be a priority. We would move to the back of the queue. And I think, given that people like Niall and people on his side are saying, oh, well, we'll be able to cut all these trade deals, not just with the EU, but all these other countries very easily, I think it is extremely valid and useful to hear what the President of the United States has to say. Now, Niall said, well, he's not going to be President of the United States in the future. But unfortunately, the day after he said this, Hillary Clinton's advisor said almost the same thing. So what we're left with in Britain now, for people on Niall's side of the argument, is hoping that Donald Trump will be in the White House. Now, I can tell you, from a British perspective, that is not an attractive option. Donald Trump, who is an anti-NATO protectionist bully, we will not be in a good position to stand up to him if we are on our own. All the more reason for us to stay in the EU.
Okay, Niall, very quickly, 28 countries negotiating a pact, just to my simple way of thinking, would seem more difficult than getting one country to agree to their own national interests, right?
The TTIP proposed agreement between the EU and the United States is practically dead in the water. That's not going to happen. It is far easier for the United States and the United Kingdom to conclude a US-UK free trade deal. There's tremendous support for that on Capitol Hill at the moment. I'm in no doubt whoever wins the next general election, whoever that is, I think there'll be tremendous pressure on the White House to sign this agreement. And is the White House going to tell America's closest friend and ally that they're not going to sign a free trade deal? That's utterly delusional.
Very quickly, Hugo, I want you to react to this. The Leave side is now waving about Norway as an example of what happens when you are detached from the EU. Now, they are part of the European Free Trade Agreement, but they're not bowing to the regulations coming out of Brussels, so say the Leave side. And yet, their economy's thriving. You would say what? Why is that not a pattern or a direction Britain would want to follow?
Well, first of all, I actually think a lot of the people in the Leave camp are not talking about Norway because they realise that, contrary to what you've said, Norway does actually have to follow all the rules of the EU's single market, and they do not have a vote on those rules. So instead of having greater sovereignty, it's actually a loss of sovereignty. So what you've had is they first of all said they wanted to do Norway. Then they found that they'd like to do Switzerland. Then Boris Johnson, who's our mayor, was the mayor of London until recently, said he'd like to copy Canada. And then the campaign chair of the Leave group said he would like to copy Albania. Well, frankly, we've had more positions for out than in the Kama Sutra, and it's not surprising, therefore, that there's a huge amount of uncertainty about what Leave would be. As David Cameron says rightly, it would be a leap in the dark.
Niall, respond.
Well, let me just say that, you know, Norway and Switzerland are free sovereign countries, and they are subject to a very small percentage, frankly, of EU regulation.
Britain is a free sovereign country. Let's be clear about this. Britain is a free sovereign country.
You are not a free sovereign country,
Niall.
Hugo.
You may not realise that. You may be out of Washington. You may have forgotten what Britain's like.
No, actually, you know, I'm sitting in
Margaret
Washington,
Thatcher
D.C., which is the capital of a free
sovereignty.
sovereign country. All right? Great Britain is not a free sovereign nation. If you don't control your own borders, if you can't negotiate your own free trade deals, you're not a free country. The American people would never, ever accept this kind of arrangement because they believe in sovereignty and freedom.
We control our schools. We control our taxes. Come on.
You don't control. You don't control your own borders. Two-thirds of British law originates
we do control
in Brussels.
our own
That's
borders.
not freedom and sovereignty.
Okay.
We do control our borders.
I am almost out of time. I'm going to give each of you a chance.
Oh my God, you can't say it's servitude.
It is.
So you think that your great hero, Margaret Thatcher, enslaved us to Brussels? I mean, you must be balmy.
Okay, I'm going to stop it right there. Hugo, very quickly, it appears as if this vote is going down. It is neck and neck in the polls. Where do you think you will end up? Where will the people of the UK decide on this EU question? Will they stay in or leave?
I think it's
very quickly.
I think it's very, very close, and frankly, I think that my side of the argument needs to do more, and in particular, it needs to come up with a positive agenda for how Britain can be a leader of Europe if we vote to stay in. And we haven't done that yet, but we certainly can be a leader if we vote to stay in. And I think if we do that, then I think we will win. If we don't, I think it'll go right down to the wire till the last minute.
Niall Gardiner, very quickly.
Well, I agree. It's going to be an extremely close vote, but I have, you know, faith and confidence in the common sense of the British people here. And I do think the British people are going to vote for sovereignty, self-determination, freedom and liberty. And frankly, the European Union stands for none of those.
Very good. What a debate. Thank you both.
We have liberty.
And,
we have freedom.
All right, Hugo, the segment's over. Thank you for being here.
Okay.
Hugo Dixon, Niall Gardiner, thank you both. We will continue to cover this very important story. The referendum takes place on June 23rd.